Welcome back to the B2B Uncut podcast. I am your new host, Aaron Sheehan, filling in for and maybe replacing the fantastic Sawyer Frank, or Frank Sawyer, if you like to reverse his name. Sometimes I do, just to mess with him a little bit. I am happy to be hosting the podcast, and I'm very happy to have Simon Rakosi with me from Butterfly.ai. He has some very interesting thoughts on workforce management for manufacturers, distributors, about supply chain automation. I think we're going to get into some interesting conversations about the future of how AI and automation is impacting today distribution centers and factory floors around the globe. So without any further ado, Simon, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Aaron, thank you very much. Nice to meet you. I'm Simon. I am the co-founder of Butterfly.ai. Myself and a couple of other guys, Marcus and David, created the company around 8 years ago now. Wow, it's crazy how the time flies. And we really focus around the world of supply chain and front-end workforce only around the past 5 years, I want to say, when we really saw the gap in terms of collecting real-time insight from people on the floor. Lots of companies were doing surveys for the corporate employees. And to be honest, that's how we started, doing pulse surveys, providing insight directly to the hands of the managers, because that was based on our own experience. But very quickly in the journey of the company, I want to say, forked out of the world of corporate to really focus about the world of frontline workforce. And that's what we've been doing for the past 6, 7 years.
Wow, that's impressive. So for your customers and your clients, what problem is Butterfly solving? I understand the frontline team, understanding your workforce. When they come to you, what is it that they're trying to solve for?
Yeah. So often they have no way to actually collect real-time insight from the teams. Some companies said, hey, we do a once a year survey. We know everything that is happening. But the challenge is that this type of workforce have a very high turnover. So the average turnover is around 55%. So if you do a once a year survey, over half the people are gone by the next time you do it again. Number one. Number two, 65% of employees do not speak the language of the manager. So there is this very, very big barrier of communication. So we have to make sure that whatever question we ask, they're always about in their own language, I want to say, but in terms of the topic as well. Like if you think about the world of corporate, we ask questions about leadership, we ask questions about directions of the company. This type of workforce don't really care much for it. It's all about the day-to-day. How can we make the day-to-day better? How can you recognize me as a person? How can you acknowledge my presence? How can you make sure that you treat me as a person? So when we start engagement with customers, the biggest challenge they have is usually turnover, followed by absenteeism. And often a byproduct is safety incidents and often productivity. And that's what tied in nicely around the world of employee engagement.
That makes complete sense to me. I think that I think I'd love to hear a little, maybe a story or anecdote from you about how a customer, maybe someone who is listening to this podcast, so someone in distribution, someone in manufacturing, a supplier, has used your tool or used a tool to solve a problem. Because I know I speak to a lot of people in the industry, in this industry, and it's funny when you're a technology vendor like Oro Commerce is, people usually want to come in and start talking about technology. They want to talk about EDI. They want to talk about ERPs. They want to talk about e-commerce platforms and marketplace software. But if you scratch the surface of that conversation, it becomes this conversation about people very, very quickly, because all of this automation and technology is ultimately still run by and run on behalf of buyers, customers, and of course operated by the people that the frontline employees who are picking and packing and manufacturing the goods. So give us an illustration of how someone might use you or how
Yeah.
someone has used you in real life to solve a problem.
Of course. So I think the topic of automation is interesting because I was at a conference recently, and I think a big turn that happened over the past year is, let's say last year, people were still testing out automation. Now it's been a proven concept. Automation works. So I would say in terms of the buying cycle, it's not the people testing it out anymore. You're going to have a lot of investment happening in automation. That's going to happen. There is no way around it. However, one thing that I want to put out there is when you automate a warehouse, the one thing that you're going to lose is flexibility. And that's what people bring. Like if you have a big influx in orders, if you're already at capacity of 95%, you can only increase it by 5%. Whereas the people are going to give you the flexibility to go beyond your current utilization, if I may say. So people are always going to be in warehouses. People are always going to be in manufacturing plant because they bring this flexibility. Another thing I would add, when you think about the world of automation, retention becomes even more important because now as part of the process of onboarding new employees, it's not only about learning about the policies, learning about the safety training, but it's about how to use machines, how to use robots, how do you fix them. So the onboarding cost is going to be more expensive and therefore the ramping up period as well will be longer. Today, it takes around 90 days for an employee to be fully onboarded and fully productive. When you add automation to the mix, this is actually going to expand because you need to add more to the training. And when you do that, it means you invest more money upfront than you did before. And therefore, the retention of employees is very, very important and is going to become more and more expensive. So any people you can keep longer, going to yield a higher return on your investment. So that is kind of the parenthesis I want to bring in. Now, in terms of real example, oh God, there is a lot of them. Because when we think about the world of employee engagement, what I like to say is when you have an engaged workforce, they're going to give you the discretionary efforts. It's the same if you ask somebody to raise their hands. Naturally, people will go like this first, but you guys hire, and actually nobody starts like this from the get-go. Everybody goes
Yes.
like this. And that's employee engagement. The more engaged they are, the more likely they're going to raise their hand all the way to the top. And that's what we've seen with a few clients. So one example that comes to mind. So like I mentioned, the world that I like personally about the front-end workforce is the diversity of culture. And as well, if you think about the US, the world of logistics and supply chain is one of the biggest hiring vertical for every new immigrants because you don't necessarily have to be fluent in English. Like you have just to do the job and then hopefully you're going to grow in your career at the same client. But one thing I learned with one of my clients that was quite interesting when they started working with Butterfly, the first time that they could actually reach out to employees in their native languages. And one of the employees actually, through the platform, I won't say almost raised their hand on how they can optimize the space, saying, well, it makes no sense that this type of employees work on these machines where they should be working on this machine. What they didn't realize that this person back home, who doesn't speak a word of English, was actually the equivalent of an industrial engineer and spent their whole life before immigrating actually working on floor plans to optimize the space. And yep. But for the first time, by collecting real-time insight and feedback from that employee and actually from all employees, they actually realized that there were a lot of gaps they could fill in quite easily. So they started to listen in. They include that person as part of a few more conversation optimization. And what actually that resulted in is actually a gain in productivity. Because that person, by just making a few changes and few recommendations, was actually the eyes on the floor on how things could be optimized, and they had experience doing that. Another one that we've seen is a manufacturing company. They have a few plants in Canada, I believe. During COVID, they had a huge disconnect between what was happening in the plants and what was happening in the plants. So when I say that, it's really about, well, the manager of the plant said everything was doing great. So yeah, everything's doing great. But when there is COVID, nobody can travel and see how bad it was. So when they implemented Butterfly, one of the things they wanted to look at was actually have no filter between the employees and senior leadership to know exactly how things were going. And what really transpired was that GM was withholding a lot of information of things that were not doing so well. They had the highest turnover across the whole group. They didn't have any fulfilled position at 100% for the past 3 years because people were quitting and they could not replace them fast enough. And for the first time they got access to that information, came in sites, realized about how terrible that manager was, decided to make some changes. But what they were very smart about it was instead of recruiting from outside, they brought somebody from the inside, promoted her as a GM. And for the first time in 4 years, they had 100% seat occupation in terms of fulfilled position. Turnover went down by around 40% within 9 months. And all of that it's crazy. And all of that starts by just giving a voice to employees. We're another client in the world of supply chain called Pete Nebos. When we started working with them, it was interesting. We started with 4 locations, and then really quickly we rolled out to the 40 plus locations. And one of the actually proof that they had was within 6 weeks, they increased productivity by 19%.
Very impressive. This is really interesting to me because, again, going back to where Commerce is a B2B e-commerce platform, customers engage with us around technology. I've been a technologist for a long time, and I can tell you that there's so much conversation in my world, Simon, that is around knowing the buyer, knowing
Yeah.
the customer journey, personalizing the buyer journey through a quoting process or through a browse to buy or cash to quote process. And what's fascinating about this is how underserved I feel like the workforce management piece of it is. But the efficiencies that you're talking about here that are being realized by your clients, by anybody that's talking to their employees, are frankly in excess of what a lot of times the buy
Yeah.
side technology is going to deliver, because turnover has a cost, right? And competent, happy employees make you they push past your growth projections
Yeah.
and are able to deliver more value. This is really interesting.
And that was very illuminating for us. And the reason we moved to this market is because we are data people at heart. And when you can translate the gain to the prospective clients or prospect, I want to say, it's a much easier conversation. Like before we were serving the frontline workforce, good luck to tell a marketing agency they're going to be 20% more productive. What does that mean? Less emails, more meetings, less time to create a project. Whereas here, like we are talking about tangible gains. On average, our customers see a return on the investment within the first 5 months. Within 5 months, they already paid back for what they pay us. Before this call, actually, I was with a prospect. I can't say who they are. They recruit an average of 400 to 500 people a month. It costs them a few $100s a month just to recruit these people. They spend every month around $80,000 to recruit someone, the whole pool. Add to that a 60-70% turnover. Our platform would be costing them maybe 15% of that. And by just reducing the turnover by 5%, not even like what we do for other clients where it's like close to the 30-40%, they pay back the product in 4 months. And it's all started by asking questions, how are you doing? And like we like to say during training, you can ask somebody to work in a warehouse and to operate a machine all day long. Or you can ask somebody, hey, we need to fulfill 1,000 orders within the hour. If you can do that well, you're going to help us achieve that number by 80%. So you start to bring accountability and empowerment to the employee, because often people ask what actually influence happiness, engagement in the workplace. There are two main things. The first one is the relationships. How you feel with your manager, how you feel with the people next to you on the line, and how you feel with the people that you share your meal with. But most important one is your manager. Like a manager is accountable for 70% of an employee's engagement. As simple as that. People don't leave companies, they leave manager. So if you have a crappy manager, you're going to be gone. If you work for a crappy company, but you have an amazing manager, you're going to stay. And that's often the case. Like, it's not rare to hear people saying like this manager is like my mentor. And that's what you want to have, leaders. The second part is what we like to call having an interesting job. And what does that encompass? It's about being able to measure the impact that you have, being able to feel that you are growing as a person, being able to be recognized and acknowledged for the work that you do. And when I say recognized, I'm really not talking about salaries. Like salary being paid, often you're going to hear in the world of supply chain, people quit because we don't pay them enough. Well, pay is not even coming in the top 5 of the reason why people leave.
Yeah. So this is interesting because I was on a call actually earlier today,
Okay.
this morning that we're recording with somebody that's been in the supply chain business for many years, and he gave a really good analogy for this. Um, he said that I'm trying to remember, so I may mess this up a little bit, but um, imagine that you have two doors and you can walk through either a door to your left or the door to the right. You open the door to the left and you look at it, and there's a long wooden plank on the floor. And at the end of the wooden plank is somebody with money. And they say, if you can walk across this plank in 7 seconds, I will give you the money. Okay, sure. Open the other door, and the plank is actually balanced between two high rise buildings, 10 stories in the air. And there's somebody with a gun. And they say, I'm going to shoot you if you don't walk across this plank in 7 seconds. And you could fall to your death. From an industrial engineer, it's the same task. Walk across the plank in 7 seconds. So the
Yeah.
outcomes should be the same. But what you're saying and what he was saying, obviously, is that the context of where you do your job matters and your ability to want to continue doing that job. It doesn't matter. The job is not the important part. It's everything around it, the context in
Yeah.
which you're asking somebody to do it. And what you're saying about Butterfly and frontline employee sentiment analysis is that this can tell you whether are you the company that is a door to the left or the company that is door to the right? Because door to the right, a lot of people are falling off the plank and it's costing, well, it's
100%.
bad, but it's also costing you a lot of money. So that's
Yeah.
fascinating.
The one thing I would add there is environment is very important, but I would really reinforce the role of the manager. Like if you think about how the manager, gonna spend thousands of hours at work. Actually, some people spend more time at work than they do at home in terms of being awake and enjoying the time. So if you think about the front end workers who are dissatisfied with the managers, they're twice more likely to leave. Number one. 1.5 more likely to actually burn out. Like burnout in the setting of the early workforce is a known issue and a growing one. It's not because people don't sit in, like you can burn out everywhere. The burnout in the supply chain industry is real. But most importantly, if you think about now the employer, if you don't like a manager, you are 3 times less likely to recommend your employer. So it has a really big branding impact as well. It's the same if you think about ENPS, Employee Net Promoter Score. I like to call it the barbecue metric because when you're around with your friend at barbecue, if you like your employer and you give a high ENPS, you're going to talk about it. If you don't like your employer, you're not going to say anything about it or you're going to diss it. So the manager is really key and essential part of any type of organization. And the challenge in this industry is that often people get promoted because they're great individual contributors. I heard some of my clients that said that people got promoted because they got always on time, but that doesn't make them good managers. And if you think about the role of a manager being so important, this industry is really tough for managers. Like if you think about the corporate setting, the ratio manager to employee is 1:8 at most, because you cannot manage more people than 8, to be honest. Well, this workforce is 1:25, if not 1:50. So the ratio is already off balance.
Hmm.
Second, in an office, even remote, you can reach out to your manager at any given time. Either you walk to the desk or you reach out to him or her through email, through Slack, and in an instant you can have a conversation. Warehouses that are above 1 million square feet, even the hundreds of thousands, good luck to walk to your manager to talk to them. Third, if you work in a corporate setting, you speak the same language as your manager. Well, spoiler alerts, 65% of employees in the supply chain do not speak the language of the manager. And last but not least, when people get promoted in the corporate setting, I was lucky enough in my previous employer to be a high potential. I got groomed, I got trained, I got ready to go to the next level. The amount of money they invested in me to be a good manager was crazy. In the world of supply chain, you don't have the same luxury. Like you get promoted to be a manager and immediately you have to hit the ground running, and it's very unforgiving for you. So we need to make sure that anyone that is listening to this or in general in the world of supply chain, you have to really empower your managers to be people first, but have to the mindset of a leader. And the difference I like to say is a manager will do the things right. A leader will do the right things. And that's a
That's
very big
right.
change in mindset.
Big, important distinction there. One I can personally connect to, having worked for both groups of people over my personal career. So I want to follow up with something a little bit, because earlier on you were talking about the role of automation and maybe the perception of automation within the supply chain industry, within not even just supply chain, but the world, just the perception of automation inside of businesses.
Yeah.
Um, we we hear a lot about it. I hear a lot about it. It's something that Oro Commerce is part of a sort of comprehensive solution to this for a lot of our customers because of the things that we automate. But I'm very curious to maybe move beyond some of the easy ideas about automation, because the easy idea about automation, I think, is I will fire a bunch of people and replace them with computers or robots or
Yeah.
automated picking and packing and image recognition cameras that will go find the thing in the right bin and bring it back. And yet, my reading of human history and technology is that usually when we have made a big technological leap, it is not that we have made people redundant or gotten rid of them. It's that we have blown past our ability to grow. Like that is, if you go back and look at human technological history in the last couple of 100 years, especially, every time there's been a big jump, right? It hasn't made life worse. It's made life better, but it's made people more individuals, more productive. And so I am curious because the conversations on the business side that happen about automation are all about cost reduction. So I'd be curious to know, is that still where the conversation, you were just at a supply chain show. I was not.
Yeah.
Is the conversation still primarily about reducing cost, or is it about growth, or is it a mix?
Yeah.
What are your impressions?
So I think last year was all about cost cutting. 2023 was god awful. It was an overcorrection of about the very luscious year we had during COVID, like the peak of COVID, because COVID is still there. I think the mindset has changed to more optimization of costs. So we've seen, and when I say optimization, it goes, if you think about automation, is making sure that people have tested different type of robotic and automation. Now they decided to go with one vendor, and they're going to invest in sign very lucrative deals with one vendor over the next few years. Same with platform. Like we have that with some clients where we are sometimes the outlier where they keep on board as part of not a large suite of product, but we see that they want to optimize cost and therefore reduction of platform use. And I think that's not going to change. When I think about automation, I think the warehouse with zero person in and just like maybe a guard and a dog, I think is utopic at the moment. I still go to clients where they have literally machine automation that are staying idle on the side because, oh, well, the suction cup does not work on our new type of envelope. Or there is like a lot of excuses, and often I don't think I've been to one warehouse with across all my clients where all the machines were running at the same time. There's always one that is not running and they're waiting for the tech. Or well, these ones cannot pick this type of a product that is currently on the line. But I think what automation will bring, however, is increased productivity to a whole other level. As long as everything fits in a nicely square box, if that makes sense. I think I shared with you an example where I went to a warehouse with one of my clients that showed me the new line they got. And the plan was to go from a 600 people warehouse to a 300 people warehouse. And they showed me this new line. It was great. Of course, the line was not running yet. One thing they realized was that the line was a bit too high and the boxes were a bit too low. And when they were dropping, it was breaking some of the packages. So they had to level it first. But then I went back a few months later and the warehouse shrank from 600 people to 950 people. So instead of going down by 300 people, it went up by 350. And the reason why is they became more productive. However, the rest of the warehouse was not fully automatized. So when you have the central piece that is going much faster, they needed more people to load the machine. They needed more space because everything was going through it so fast that they actually had more boxes ready to go. They needed more drivers because the box had to leave the floor much faster, but they still needed they had people literally at the start of the machine to flip the boxes so that they can read the QR codes, which was something they didn't need before. So I think the idea of automation is going to replace people is unfounded. I think you're going to have some jobs that are going to be impacted, but this is where the opportunity is. Anyone that is going to the path of automation because they see it as a long-term investment, have to make sure that they take on board their employees. Because one thing you don't want to have is dictating change. You want to take them on board in the journey. Reassure them. Make sure that actually now part of the training, we're going to upskill you. And another thing about automation that is really positive, like the new generation lacks gadgets, lacks technology. So you want to be attractive to them because soon I'm a millennial on the cusp, but my parents' generation are going to slowly leave the workforce. And these were actually the biggest addition to the manual labor. So you need more people. Like another data point that could be interesting to you, for every employee leaving the supply chain right now, only 0.6 are coming in. So you have a widening gap between the amount of open positions and people to fill it in. So it has to be replaced one way or the other. Automation is part of the solution, for sure, but retention and upskilling is a different one. Like I said earlier, people are going to bring flexibility, and that's actually, as human, we need flexibility. Like you cannot overinvest in a new line for 4 months a year because you want to make sure you hit your quota and your targets for peak. That will make no sense financially. So in peak season, you're always going to hire more people. So the question you have to ask yourself is how both of them live together. And the best way to do that is to keep a pulse on your employees. How do they feel about the changes? How do they feel recognized and acknowledged in this new system? How do you make sure your managers are trained to be agent of change for your employees? And this is where it's all a virtuous cycle. Like everything there are all different parts that have to talk to one another because the people that is purchasing the machines or in the automation and the robot is not the same person that is hiring all this workforce. So how do they all talk together? You cannot work as a silo. You have to make sure that everything works in harmony.
That's absolutely true. It's something that a lot of companies struggle with just because of the way that they grew organically over time. And I have seen a number of success stories over the years where companies that were experiencing growth figured out the problem of communicating cross-functionally across different lines so that the groups were talking to one another. And I can imagine in the story that you told about the warehouse that shrank from 600 to 900 people, that some of those mistakes with the automation could have been avoided, possibly with more conversation from the people who were there at eye level looking at the actual equipment being
Yeah.
installed, who are actually doing the work. Um, that is a pretty good point. So we've talked a lot about automation. We've talked a lot about
Yeah.
your product, about Butterfly, and how it facilitates sort of the information coming into decision makers, basically to make
Yeah.
good decisions. So it builds a feedback loop, that a virtuous cycle, I think is what you called it. I love, by the way, that this is basically a TED talk. Like this is great. This is perfect. Um, I would love to hear if you have predictions about where you think automation, and we haven't said AI outside of it's in the name of your product.
Yeah.
But I feel like one must say AI on a podcast now in 2024. But
Was-
uh, what do you think we're going to see by the end of this year and maybe 3 years from now in terms of automation and the role of AI maybe in that automation for the people that we're talking about, manufacturers,
Yeah.
distributors, anybody operating a warehouse or an assembly line or a factory floor? What do you think?
So it's a great question. And it's a tough question. As soon as we have AI, to be honest, when we have AI in our title of a product as a company, often people are scared about it uh, because AI is scary. Like when you realize that now you can create these videos on demand and they can just do in a snap of a finger, create almost a whole movie. It's scary. But if I think personally about the role of AI and technology in the world of supply chain, I think it's going to bring more transparency, more accountability at the same time. Because when you have transparency, you have to bring accountability. And I think you're going to have a lot about warehouses optimization, about space, about workforce. And it goes as well with cost optimization. Understand your cost, understand your business. My accounting teacher told us that. And I think AI is going to be very good at identifying opportunities on how to spend less time because in the world of supply chain, time is money. And it could be in terms of how do you get items faster through the line or faster to the customer. And I think this is we're gonna see more and more optimization. Another thing that we should not downplay is the behavior of the buyer as well. I think the buyers become more and more conscious than they were before. I think environment is a very big component. Like I moved to the US about 9, 10 years ago, and I became very accustomed to the next day delivery. And I personally see now that I don't need anything the next day anymore. Like I can wait a couple of more days. So you start to see, for example, what you call like stock optimization. Like how do you manage your stock? And that's why you see, let's call it Amazon when you do an order. For a while now, they offer you an option to actually consolidate your order together. And it's beneficial for them mainly, but the way they package it is good for the environment because it's less packages. So if you're a conscious buyer, then I'm gonna go for that option. And actually, I pick that option because I have way too many card boxes at home. So I much rather have one with everything
Yes.
together, and I can afford to wait 24 hours. But if you think about it, this is going to impact cost for them because shipping is gonna get lower. So I think where AI and automation and I would say robotics is going to play. It's about transparency. It's about accountability, like I said earlier. But all in all, I don't think AI is going to replace human. I think it's going to make them almost like give them superpowers. Like,
Love it.
yeah,
I love the optimism. I think that's been the theme of the conversation is actually relentless optimism in the face of automation and AI taking all of our jobs. You heard it here. This is the optimistic futurist
it
podcast, and
is.
now Oro B2B Uncut. So let me ask you, Simon, then the last
Yeah.
serious question of
Yeah.
of of the podcast, which is if one of our customers or one of our listeners was to come to you and ask for advice on how to improve their employee engagement, or retention. Obviously, you would tell them you should buy Butterfly AI, but you might give them something else. What else would you tell them besides obviously buying
Yeah.
your product?
Um, I would say invest in your managers. Um, and because your managers are the most important people. Like if you think about well, what we are called butterflies because of the butterfly effect. Like with a small flap of a wing, you can have a massive impact to the rest of the world. And if you think about this flap of a wing, it starts with managers. Like statistics shows that manager is accountable for 70% of the team's engagement. So give them the right tools, the right skills, because when you give them the right tools and the right skills, they're going to be well equipped for the role. When they're well equipped for the role, they're going to engage their workforce, engage their teams. If you think about it, whoever is at some point customer facing, engaged employees gives you engaged customers that impact your growth. Because if you enjoy what you are shopping, what you are doing, you're going to go back again. And eventually your stock will go up. So I would say where to start from, start with providing the information, the right information to your managers, empower them. Very important. But as well, when you think about the type of work they do, make sure that you allocate some time for them to spend with the team. Like if a manager is spending all day long in front of a desk just filling reports without having time to actually walk the floor, is gonna be not paying the dividends that you want. That's one thing. The other thing is try to promote from within. It's very easy to hire managers and first level of managers outside. It's actually cheaper if you think of it, because the process, when I say cheaper, is you just have to pay for a headhunter that bring you profile and then you pay the headhunter. It's much more tedious to find the right person in-house to promote from within, because when you do that, you show everyone that is on the front line that actually there is no glass ceiling, that any opening that there is, one of them can actually fill in one day. If you hire from outside, you actually put this glass ceiling. You're never going to be higher than a lead. You're never going to be higher than a supervisor, because we're going to get our managers or GMs outside of the org. So I think it's very important to be transparent on the hiring process. Try to promote from within so that you can show people there is a path forward. Like we talked about growth. Well, the natural evolution from growth is career path. People want to know they have a future. That today they might not, if they are conscious about the salary, then you want them to know that there is a potential for them to stay longer at the company, get promoted, and get a bigger paycheck. Last but not least, is any type of relationship, treat people like people, not numbers. Yeah, know the name of the like one of the feature we have on Butterfly, we call it nurture, and it's just to provide information, collect insight to from the employees based on the employee journey. But one of the part that we have is we tell managers when is the birthday of the team members. Oh, today is Aaron's birthday. Why don't you go there and say happy birthday to them? This sounds very basic and very trivial, but we need to make sure that we put the human back in the middle of the people as well. Like treat them like peace. Hey, Aaron, how are you doing? Wow, congratulations, you've been here for a year. All of these make a huge difference when people are going to decide to walk the plank with a gun on their head or just walk the plank in the middle of a white room.
Perfect way to bring it back. I love that. That is excellent and good advice. And I would especially say that the promote from within resonates very strongly with me. I have seen so many examples of companies who did push the easy button by hiring a recruiter
Yeah.
or simply a director, a friend of a vice president, and completely bypass the workforce that you have. And it's so demoralizing to people when the the premise is that if I work hard and I do a good job and I show up and I go above and beyond, I do get rewarded for that. And if you see that there's a completely separate track, there's a train that you can't get on,
Yeah.
it makes you less likely to want to keep going. So this has been a fantastic conversation. It did not go everywhere I thought it would go. It went in some unexpected directions, which is fantastic. I love it when that happens. The final question to you then is not related at all to your
Yeah.
product or to workforce or any of that. What's the best book, movie, TV show that you have consumed in the last few weeks that stood out to you? Not the best, not the your favorite of all
Okay.
time, just something
Yeah.
lately that you like. Go.
Um, so it's a book called Dark Matter. The author is Blake Crouch. And it's a book about parallel universe, not about time traveling, but it's about the different version of yourself at the same moment across a multi-layer universe. And I found it amazing because it goes back to the flap of a wing, to be honest. And I don't try to bring it back to butterfly, but it's all about the decision that you make and how they impact you today. And I 350 pages, consumed them in surprisingly within 3, 4 days. And it's been a while I didn't read, pick up a book and I could not put it down. So yeah, that'll
Okay.
be the book.
Dark Matter. We don't have an affiliate link to put out or a coupon code to give you listeners to go buy Dark Matter from your book retailer of choice. But should you do and should you enjoy it, please let Simon and myself know so we can pass that back. And maybe there's a future as a content reviewer, Simon, and
Yeah,
that you can earn some affiliate revenue, a revenue
I
stream
take it.
off of your. Every little bit helps. You have to optimize, right?
Exactly.
That's the theme. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
your time. This has been great.
Thank you.
Really look forward to seeing more from Butterfly and maybe spotting a butterfly around our client base at sometime in the not too distant future. So thank you
That'd be
again.
great.
Thank you,
Thank you.
listeners. Appreciate it. Uh, Tune in next time, which will probably be a couple of weeks from after you listen to this. We'll have other episode dropping. And thanks again. Have a wonderful rest of your day.